The women's jail at Constitution Hill dates back to 1910, when it was built in close proximity to the old fort at number 4. The prison housed both black and white women convicted of common law and political crimes. Many black women were arrested for brewing beer illegally and for transgressing pass laws, which made them vulnerable to arrest and irrevocably divided families. Together with their mothers, many children also spent time in the women's jail. Prominent anti-apartheid activists Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, Fatima Meer, and Barbara Hogan were all incarcerated at the women's jail during their political careers. Together with the rest of the precinct, the women's jail closed in 1983.
Okay.
Oh gosh. You need to unmute. Hello, Tumelo is muted. Please, can you unmute her?
Testing. Can you hear me?
Thank you. You're audible. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I'd like to just welcome you once again for joining us right here for the AFI Masterclass. I am your host, Tumelo Mothotoane, and as mentioned before, what you've just seen in those visuals, that video, now that of course encompasses the history of South Africa right here in this platform at the Constitutional Hill. Now this is the very same place where we saw both men and women being arrested, being incarcerated here, the likes of Ndate Nelson Mandela, Dos Lovo, Albertina Sisulu, Madikizela Mandela. But we're seeing those contrasts, you know, of justice and injustice. We're seeing injustices during the apartheid era, but also justice in just the opportunity to talk about how we can further try and correct the mistakes of the past. When we look at liberation, segregation, but also democracy, it's for that particular reason why we found this venue befitting to host the AFI Masterclass around inclusivity as well as diversity within the fashion industry. It's a pleasure to welcome you, not only from South Africa, but from around the world to our virtual audience members. This is not a one-way conversation. Please feel free to, of course, in your comments, your questions, as I introduce our panelists for this afternoon. And of course, joining us to take this conversation even further, I'm joined by stylist and fashion architect, fashion maven, Mr. Felipe Mazibuko, of course, joins us, but also next to him is Ms. Nandi Madida. You know her as an entertainer, all-round businesswoman, but also a fashion designer and her label Color, and also Ms. World SA and the former Miss Africa 2019, Olivier. Joining us, we also have the honor of being joined by Ms. Zozibini Tunzi, current and reigning Miss Universe. Thank you so much for your time. But also I'd like to welcome Celine Denver for joining us and representing the French embassy. They'll be touching on this very important partnership they share with AFI. Last but definitely not least is the founder, the engineer of this platform, Action International, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe. And of course, I welcome you all home for joining us right here. You can feel free to join in through our various social media and digital platforms. So without any further ado, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, I'd like to give you this platform, please, just to give us a welcome remark.
Thank you very much, Tumelo. And I hope you can hear me. This is becoming normal thing when we do WebEx meetings or Zoom meetings. Can you hear me? That is the common sense.
Yes,
Thank you very much. Can I ask the technical people at AFI to please check the sound? Our sound is not very good. And thank you very much. Welcome everyone to the AFI Masterclass and the opening of Fashion Week Joburg 2020. African Fashion International, as you know, is home to African creators. Through various platforms, we promote our contemporary African designs and cultures. We initiate discourses around crucial industry-related themes, and we champion sustainable development agenda with stakeholders and partners from across Africa and the world. To me, I think we seem to have an echo in the background. Could I ask the technical people to please check the sound and make sure that we can enjoy listening to Zozi, to Nandi and Felipe and Sasha, who's given up their time to come and talk to us about diversity and inclusivity at this very historic building. So I'm going to ask Roshni and the team to please just check the sound before we commence. But to continue, I just want to also welcome Tumelo. Thank you very much. You've always been very supportive of our events and the discussions that we've had. You add so much value to these discussions, and we really appreciate you. I also want to thank the French Embassy, who thought that this topic, especially discussions around this topic, are very important, particularly now in the world when we're going through so much, finding ourselves, reimagining what the world could be, and bringing into the fold most of the people that have been left out of discussions around diversity and inclusivity. Our theme this year is Reset, Reimagine, and Reinvent. And I couldn't think of a better theme to have than the one on diversity and inclusivity. If you think about it, by taking away the physical audiences in fashion weeks, these spaces that were once elite and were just invite-only spaces have now opened up to the public, and there is greater scrutiny and higher expectations from ordinary people that forces the industry to reflect on the perspectives of the diverse people that are part of this industry. Fashion, culture, a creative industry influences our culture and vice versa. It sets the values that become trends in our daily lives. And if you think about it, there's always been a select group of people who decided what was the standards as far as what we hold in high esteem is concerned. They are the ones who decide which designers we follow. They are the ones who decide which styles become emulated. But now we know that when it comes to African culture, as well as cultures and creativity from other regions, from Africa and the emerging economies, those have really been left out. And it is left then to our designers to occupy that space, to speak up. And we know that fashion and the creative industry, music, they have a very loud speaker. So when we talk about issues that of inclusivity and diversity that affect people in general, the industry has to be at the forefront of these discussions and dialogues. So I'd like to invite our panel members and Tumelo to then take us through how we reinvent and reimagine the future of our creative industry. And it's not just the creative industry where we talk about diversity and inclusion. It could be in any sector, but we're starting here and now, and I cannot wait to hear the discussions from the floor. And I'm going to hand over to Tumelo to lead us through this discussion. Thank you so much for the audiences that are joining us from home. And thanks, Tumelo. Over to you.
Types of people when it comes to race, gender, culture, tradition. It seems there's a one-way binocular, phrasing and framing of fashion, which has, oftentimes of models how we perceive we should look like, we should sound like, what beauty is defined as, and we'll get into more of that. But before we do that, I'd just like to welcome, of course, our representative from the French Embassy, Celine Denver, just to perhaps share a message with us, and perhaps even the importance of why they found quite for their partner with Africa Fashion International. Celine, welcome. Stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tumelo. So it's a true honor to be among you today with such an amazing panel, and I wish I could be with you in Cornhill right now. Supporting the fashion industry in South Africa is a priority for the French Embassy and the French Institute. Of course, this wouldn't be possible without partners. So I would like to start with thanking AFI for this wonderful opportunity and this wonderful partnership. And it's actually quite amazing the work that has been put in this online fashion week and the work that has been done to organize this despite of the current circumstances. So thank you to the teams. I think we're at a crucial moment in fashion history. This year, more than any other year, has brought questions, of course, around the sustainability of the industry, but also around its diversity, its inclusivity. I think of course, we're going to discuss this topic more in depth today, but this year has been quite intense in all ways. And of course, I'm talking about the pandemic, but so much has been going on the world stage. And I think when we talk about access, for instance, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, you were mentioning the access to online events and the way how digital events have opened up new perspectives in terms of accessibility to new audiences. So I think this is extremely important, actually, and this AFI Online Fashion Week also shows that. I'd like to say also, of course, when we talk about diversity, we talk about also the representation of the African continent on the international fashion scene. This, of course, can be applied to many other fields of culture and arts. But I think fashion is also quite crucial in the sense that it's the way we dress, it's our daily lives, it's really a part of our cultures. So I think it's extremely important to have a representation of everybody on this planet in the industry. And I'm actually so happy that there is a bigger consciousness in France around what's going on the African continent and in South Africa. For instance, we had Felipe Mazibuko, who received the LVMH prize last year. And I think this has really raised awareness as well. And I really would like to support this momentum, and this is also why I think this topic of discussion was extremely relevant. So a lot can still be done in this regard, and I would like to say that we are by your side not only to reflect on those topics and discuss and exchange ideas, but also really to act on this. So I don't want to be too long. I would like to thank you all. Thank you to the panelists, of course. Thank you so much. Felipe Mazibuko, thank you, Zozibini Tunzi, Sasha, Olivier, and Nandi Madida, and thank you so much, dear Tumelo, for your introduction. And I wish you fruitful discussions, and then I hope to be here with you in the future to discuss everything that we can do with this regard and for more diversity in fashion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celine, for that. I mean, as an individual representing the French embassy, rather, that is the fashion and that support coming from an influential fashion player from a country such as France is quite important when it comes to African perspective. So thank you so much for joining us. But let me bring it back to studio, and of course I will involve you as well as Zozibini Tunzi of Miss Universe into this conversation. But I want to get, perhaps, if I may, welcome you again, and thank you so much for taking time out to have this discussion. But Felipe, I want to start this conversation with you. I mean, you are described according to my research, as a fashion maven and a style architect. And I mean, your experience, and as far as your resume is concerned, spans decades. So I'm sure anyone watching, whether in the industry or not, is more keen to also know where this started. Africa's role when it comes to fashion, its history. Where did we begin as a people?
I think we've always called Africa as a visual country, as a visual continent. So for me, ever since I grew up, for me, all I was surrounded by was color, texture, and diversity. And within that, if you go back even with Drop magazine, where it sort of like put us on the front of art exhibition and art fashion, it sort of like paved the way and set us on a very amazing benchmark. But within that, what Africa was going through was a lot of political turmoil with apartheid and all that. So we could not necessarily focus on the creative industries. We had other bigger battles to fight. But within that, aesthetically, whether you look at all the African leaders, whether from Nelson Mandela and William, within the struggle, it was the kind of essence of class, of elegance, and of understanding within the drama and the fight. We still need to represent our diversity in our club and in our class. So for me, it's always been something that's embedded in my system. It's always my representation as a Soweto boy. It's always, I always see my face. It's always my freckles. Every sport is every diversity that you can ever think about. And for me, that's been my journey in sort of like sealing my existence and my journey into contributing and fighting a small little battle when it comes to making sure that we are narrating and telling our stories beyond navigating into the norms.
Right.
So for me, it's always been where I come from and how I can study myself first before I can give myself to the world.
Absolutely. Nandi, I'm sure. When I think of fashion, personally in my life, fashion has different eras. I place them in different boxes in my life. When I see the beret, I know that my grandmother would wear one to church or to funerals. When I see the All-Star, I know that there was a time whereby Spanzula, even to date, played a very critical role in culture. So there are different elements, textures, as you mentioned, Felipe, that I can put in different boxes in my life. For you as almost a new age fashion designer, was there diversity that you could pick from when you sourced your inspiration?
I think the most important thing, and thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone watching. The most important thing to understand about Africa and why it's so glorious is that we're the cradle of humankind. But not only that, the cradle of fashion. It all started here. And so the whole world has forever been inspired by us. And I think that is always key to understand. So whether it's your new tones from Khoisan, or your bolder tones from like West Africa or Central Africa, your glorious accessories from like Mali or ancient Egypt. Just we've always been at the forefront of what is now called fashion. So I actually wanted to correct you by saying, yes, the French have branded themselves as the capital of fashion. But really, honestly, when you speak of real history, it all started here.
Started in Africa.
And so you're seeing how much we've inspired the world and continue to inspire the world with many of our tones, our textures, as you were saying. It all started here. And that's why if you look at our history from ancient Africa to now, we have beautiful stories. Whether you have Miriam Makeba, to Queen Nefertiti's, to Queen Nandi's, you name it, Queen Zinga's, these incredible people, and icons to Philippe, to people like our Miss Universe, Zozi, who are breaking boundaries, and really leaving a lasting legacy to our history. We've been doing it, we have been glorious, and it's just for us now, instead of us yearning to have a seat at the table, let's change the narrative. Let's create our own table. Because our table is dope and it's been dope. Colonialism told us otherwise, but I want to sit at this table forever because this is where everything happens.
And I think the background and history is quite important, especially for this generation, to continuously ensure the messaging is up to date, it's correct, so that they can retell actually the facts. And I mean, Sasha, if I could invite you to this conversation, I think you represent, as Nandi mentioned, the likes of, Zozi, our Miss Universe, women that are truly breaking barriers. Because if we are honest, When you won, of course, Miss World SA, and you obviously took over the reins as Miss South Africa, you were the first women that we saw on our TV screens that looked like us, that spoke like us, and said, you are beautiful exactly the way you are valid the way you are. But I'm sure that was met with a bit of resistance at some point. Take me through your experience.
You know, there's definitely been a lag with regards to society and how they celebrate, you know, different people. And it's quite strange for me because South Africa is just so diverse. The world is so diverse. But just taking it back historically, there was this pre-assumed template that was placed upon us by a subjective society, and they only celebrated really one type of woman or a certain skin tone. And you know, one of my mentors, she said this. She said that every person who's born into this world with their skin tone has this, how can I say, a certain consequence, a social consequence that comes with that skin tone. And there is also a certain social consequence that comes with this body shape and this size. And obviously, in terms of the industry, plus size is, you know, anything above sample size. If we go in accordance with, you know, society, it's subjective because to someone I may be plus size, but to someone I may not be. But the most important thing is, you know, how you view yourself. And I think that that's what's gotten me through, you know, because I think, you know, with the likes of Kamala Harris, who spoke about, you know, being the first woman in that place, you can't be the last. So I may be the first person of my size in, you know, Miss South Africa, but I surely can't be the last. And I think that that's what drives me through because, you know, you have to look at the bigger picture. It's about who you represent.
Absolutely. And Zozi, if I may come to you, I mean, you can't separate beauty from fashion. When you think fashion, you think beauty, you think colors, you think trend setting, you think, you know, a season, an era. And I think what was most powerful about your win, your victory, and your reign is that you challenged decades and centuries of messaging around what is acceptable, what's the norm, what almost every woman around the world, if not around the continent, had been battling with to say, am I enough? Am I okay? Do I need to alter anything to be accepted? I mean, how important was it for you to stand on that stage and to say to the world that not only do you need to cement yourself in terms of owning your space, but do it as you are?
Thank you so much, Tumelo. It's been interesting times. I think I operate on two things. The first one is we cannot be what we can't see. You know, in order for us to be something, we have to see it first. And the second thing that I operate on is the concept that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And so for me, it was so important to carry that message through. What I mean by we can't be what we can't see is we need to see women like myself. We need to see women like Sasha Lee on the stages of what beauty is, because like she said, there's been one kind of beauty that's been known to us, and it has been very Eurocentric. Beauty has never looked like my hair. Beauty has never looked like my skin. And so when I stepped onto the Miss South Africa platform leading into Miss Universe, you know, there was quite of a shake in the pageant industry where people were even kind of angry and uncomfortable with seeing my face there going to represent South Africa. And it was quite shocking to me personally as a South African, because looking into South Africa, about 80% of our population is women who look like me, Black women, women who carry my kind of hair. And so I had to kind of educate in that regard to say, look, it's so important for women like me to be on this platform so that when young girls page on their magazines, when they switch on their TV, they know that this, you know, kind of look and this kind of beauty is a beauty as well. And so I'm so happy definitely to be the first, like Sasha said, and hopefully never to be, you know, the last. And I'm so happy with what's happening. I don't know if you guys follow the pageant scene, but if you look at the contestants that we have this year for Miss Universe, it is such a diverse group of people. And if I had to take the flack and the hate from the people, that's fine. You know, I was willing to be, you know, that test goat, as you can say. And I'm happy to see the progress, and I'm happy to see where we are. And secondly, what I meant by, you know, we are ancestors' wildest dreams, as you spoke briefly about the history of South Africa and where we are today. When I think about my great-grandmother and my late ancestors, never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined a panel that looks like we do today. Never would they have imagined that our voices matter and that our voices count in the world, let alone a young girl from a village, Kutsolo, flying across the world, being in New York and being called Miss Universe, the most beautiful woman in the universe. People want to listen to me, a young Black woman from an apartheid past South Africa. And so it's just so incredible. And I think it's moments like these that we need in order for us to change the narrative, to reshape our future and tell our stories with our own voices. Like Nandi said, it's so important as well to take back the narrative and to say, we can't just stand back and let people tell our stories, but it's up to us as well, as Africans, South Africans, to tell our stories the way that they're meant to be told.
And I'm glad to say that, Zozi, because reminded of what Dr. Precious touched on, to say that, this industry has elitism, in a sense that there is a small group of people that decide, who actually gets that VIP invite, who actually gets to decide what we wear, what's appropriate, what's fashionable. And Felipe, I wanted to ask you then, how do we twist that? How do we change that narrative as to who then gets a seat on that table to say, okay, this is what the fashion buyers are going to buy, this is what we're going to spread out in magazines, and this is what consumers are going to actually buy?
I'll start off by saying, like Zozi has set the ground. For me, from short hair to no hair. So we see the evolution of what we in South Africa putting as a major statement. From Zozi with short hair to no hair within in South Africa.
Yeah.
I think that every consumer needs to take cognizance of that. Beyond that, every retailer, every creative has to take that inspiration and reinvent what we somehow had lost within ourselves. We have everything, we have capabilities, and for me, it's ironic that we're sitting here and talking about diversity. We are the origins. We just have to reclaim everything we have.
Right.
We consistently have to be fighting about who we are. For me, it is I have to start re-educating the world. We are the majority within the whole universe. We have to start promoting our own. We have to start engaging with our own, and we have to start buying our own.
Yeah. And when you speak about us taking back the ownership in terms of telling our story, Nandi, I'm reminded by your excellent feature in Black is King, which I believe, knowing you personally and just knowing your character and what you stand for, I know that you, in Maya Angelou's words, stood there's one but came there's thousands, if not millions, in terms of representing the continent, because I know how intentional you are about representing the continent and you look, how you sound, and the work that you do. What's the responsibility on fashion designers, on fashion consumers, on Africans in terms of telling that story when they go abroad, when they're on social media and the content is consumed in real time by everyone around the world in telling an authentic African story?
Oh, and that's a great question. First of all, thank you so much for those kind words. There's a massive legacy here. So many people have put in the work for decades now. But I think what's most important is for us to have a great self-esteem first. So ensure that we're not appropriated or expropriated in any way. As designers, as pageant queens, as entertainers, whatever the case may be, as creative as a whole, whatever the case may be in terms of us as Africans, we need to have a sense of pride that you will understand how we work and this is how we do things, and for you to understand our work. In fact, you're speaking of Black is King, and I remember when we were doing the project, we kept saying how important this project would be for the world. Not realizing its impact until it was out there, but how important it was to ensure that we represent people of color in a dignified manner. But the beautiful thing is, from the cast to the directors to everyone involved, these were African people or the diaspora, so the African diaspora, and we were telling our story. And that's when you speak of ownership, us owning the narrative, because we're the best people to tell that story. So I think it starts with us having a great sense of esteem, of self, and saying, this is how we do things, and letting the world know that. And that's what you start to see, because at first it was buying face, and so it will be used as faces, to sell more for others. But now what you're saying is people want ownership. They want to own their own narratives. And how beautiful it comes out when that is the case. So it's a beautiful thing for us to be aware of our legacy, but also to own our narrative and ensure that we're not appropriated. It's a fine line. So the whole world's looking at us.
Yeah.
But we need to kind of center ourselves and say, let's tell the story right.
Right, absolutely.
Can I just go in
Yeah,
there?
sure.
For me, sometimes I get tired of the word narrative. For me, it's how are we navigating to reclaim and reinvent that narrative. We do own the narrative.
Already.
So let's kill that word narrative. How do we navigate into reinventing ourselves, reimagining Africa in the most classy and beautiful way, and owning it? For me, the narrative word is very dominant in my vocabulary because I own it. So why should I always do it?
Yeah.
For me, it's about taking it, forget the narrative, and navigate to what reimagining and reimagining how you could be contributing again, how you could be reclaiming. Narrative, you own it. You cannot all the time be selling it.
Yeah. But also, I think it's easy for us to have this conversation. I mean, we are in Bloemfontein, we are at the Constitutional Hill, we're privileged even in the setting that we're in, being together. And Sasha Lee, and I can imagine you understand the influence that your platform has, your pageantry has on that young girl in Kotumva, that young girl in Imlaz, that young girl in Lewaho, who's watching you and saying, oh my goodness, this is influential, this is who I want to become, this is the confidence I want to encompass. How do we then reinvent, as Felipe said? How do we then reimagine as young women who are based in this previously disadvantaged backgrounds, communities, in rural areas, and we're constantly imposed on based on the media we consume, what we see in our feeds on Instagram, what we view on television. When we walk into a retail store, a mall, it says this is what's beautiful. You buy it, or I don't know where else, you get something else, or an alternative. What would you say then to that young girl who is there right now in this conversation?
I think, it's up to the collective. It's the collective responsibility, from standpoint of businesses, we need to be basically servicing the demographic of that particular region where our stores are based. And in actual fact, that doesn't really happen. So that's why we don't see our faces reflected in, the model spaces that they have used, historically. So it's important for, the retailers to get involved and the businesses to basically service those regions and ensure that every touch point from a marketing perspective, is, subject to that particular demographic.
Yeah.
And I think the only time we can get there is when at the level of the executive or at an institutional level, they don't hold the same biases that perpetuate that divide. Because that is what we could be seeing.
Yeah.
And we have been seeing that for the longest time. So from the standpoint of businesses, that's where the shift needs to happen. And then from the standpoint of, the consumer, as Nandi said, it's all about self-esteem. It's about understanding that you're worthy of the space that you own.
Right.
And, it may start with just loving yourself and understanding that you're worthy of that space. And no one can teach you self-love.
Right.
And you're not going to find it in this space right now because, it's still evolving. It's changing so much. And I think it's just so important that we have, these role models like, the likes of Zozi, like, each and every single one of us who, represent South Africa and how diverse it is.
Yeah. And I asked this, Sasha, which you answered beautifully, because as a news anchor, I still interview men and women, South African, that say, I still only wear isiXhosa during a wedding or if there's umsebenzi, ekhaya, because I don't know if I can walk into a boardroom with my Zulu traditional way and be accepted, right? And be taken seriously. Absolutely. I'm not sure if I can speak isiZulu in a meeting and be taken seriously. I'm not sure if I can be isangoma with isiPhandla and be accepted. Those are some of the corporate sort of stereotypes that are still seen. You want to add?
Sorry, and it goes back to what you were saying, and I agree. My friend, I actually do agree. That's why I keep saying narrative, and saying, but that is our narrative. It's still that way. But it's because I actually don't think we all realize that we own it.
Right.
Yeah. And you're completely right.
Right.
And how now we just need to navigate our way through.
We need to navigate into reclaim our systems. And for me, the most important, these type of platforms are just not frivolous. This is the place where educating people. This is the place where people see me in the streets. They don't take me for granted. They always think the fashion and creative industry is very frivolous. For me, it is part and parcel of my psychosis. It's part of my blood. It's part of everything that I am. I wake up and I think, how am I going to help another Black creative to the next level? So for me, this kind of conversations, we need to start having more of these conversations in reinventing the wheel. What I compared to 30 years ago when I worked at True Love magazine, it's easier today, but how do they learn that history?
Absolutely.
So for me, it's always type of systems, even within diversity, within the commercial world, in terms of retailers, you find within the board or within the buyers, there's only one head buyer who's white, who's dictating to the junior buyers or Black who live in the township what Black people should be wearing. So we have to change from those type of systems how we can navigate and reclaim our.
And to do that, I think cultural sensitivity is important. And Zozi, I want to bring you into this because I saw two different pictures, if I may describe them. They're not yours. The one is yours, but the first one is of Ogog Esther Mahlangu. And we know how culturally sensitive she is when it comes to representing who she is. I mean, Ogog Esther is intentional. She is intentional when she walks into a room about owning who she is and giving you, almost the same light to say, do the same. It's actually very fun up here. And we've seen it in various ways she's done on how she dresses and in her different arts and creativity. But also, I remember a picture of you, Zozi, when you were at home, Ekaya, you were actually outside. There was a reporter outside there. I don't know if you were cooking pap or is chef but I mean, I saw a Xhosa woman who looked absolutely beautiful and who also gave other women permission to feel and own their beauty, even in that moment, Ekaya, in the rural areas, doing what they love, which is probably cooking for their family, etc. How important do you think it is, to be culturally sensitive when we speak and act on inclusivity?
Thank you so much for that, Tumelo. For me, I was home. That's how I've always been. When I'm home, this is how I dress, this is how we cook. And just because I become Miss Universe and move across the world doesn't change that. And again, it goes back to telling our stories about who we are. And I'm very intentional. That post was a very intentional post. I did it on purpose because I knew that not only do I have 2.7 million followers, those followers are not just from South Africa, they are from across the world. And I wanted to educate, but to also instill confidence, like Sasha said, into, South African women and South African people to say, this is also actually the right way to do things. There's no one way of doing things. And so that's why this is so important. And I know we've been speaking about narrative a lot, like Nandi says, and that's because it is at the core, what it is. It starts with me, it starts with you, showing people what we look like at home, showing people what our life is. And then it moves on to a bigger platform, like, productions such as Black is King, where Nandi said we had a lot of Africans in there, African creatives who were there to tell their stories. So when we speak about inclusion and diversity and representation, like you say, Tumelo, it starts very deep. And it should be fixed at higher levels in order for us to reinvent ourselves and in order for us to take back who we are and show who we are to the world. It has to start in spaces like, the media. It has to start in spaces like corporate as well. Who is telling these stories? When you are hiring in corporate South Africa for a certain campaign that we want to run, what kind of people do you have, in the meetings? Who is sitting at the table telling these stories? And so for me, when I speak about intention, when I look at people like, Ogogo Esther Mahlangu, who is very intentional about who she is, it should be everywhere. Not only in the fashion industry, but in the boardrooms, it should be in our homes. Let us make sure that we are in their faces at all times, that they never forget who we are, that we scream, as loud as possible to tell our own story. Sorry, Tumelo, you're on mute, so I'm not hearing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. Miss Universe, I mean, you are slowly saving 2020. You're coming and making sure everybody hears this. But I'm going to take the last round of just answers from my panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to everyone watching on live stream, on social media. Please continue to send through those comments and questions, and I'll be sure to ask them to our panelists. Before we come to those questions, Felipe, I've been very curious, and I'm glad that you're here. Fast fashion. We're seeing it booming. We're seeing Instagram boutiques taking over. We're seeing so much of fast fashion almost sort of disrupt the industry. Do you think fast fashion poses a threat to this very conversation we're having today?
Do you have 5 more hours? I think number one, there's always a place for everything. I really think that into fast fashion, especially in this country, it goes back to government. When the government signed the whole Treaty of AGOA, it really killed the essence of all the artisans, and I could go on for hours. So for me, how we can unpack that is by having small little workshops with the Department of Trade and Industry to re-educate the ministers themselves on how important it is to nurture the small artisans. And what the Treaty of AGOA did was it promoted China, just flushed over Africa and space, especially South Africa. And I could go on for hours. Let me just cut it short. So for me, fast fashion is dead already. We're going back to slow fashion, and slow fashion is all about artisanal stuff. It's all about smaller capsule collections. It's more about designers telling their intense stories with their collections. It's more about people being interested in learning about other cultures. So when they buy a garment, it's just not a garment. It's something they want to frame in their house. It's something they want to walk in the street and say, oh, this is a closet garment. Right. This is the story behind it. So fast fashion is already dead. We are reinventing the wheel of knowing each other as humans globally, whether it could be from Nigeria, whether it could be from Mexico. Every single artisan and everyone who's creative is going smaller and best forward. Right. So that it's much more, I can engage with you and tell you my story. Yeah. And Nandi, you want to add on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I always want to add with But just to corroborate your point, oh yes, absolutely. You're seeing it on social media. What a gift actually social media has been, especially during this pandemic, where I know someone like myself sitting at home has been going through so many different creative pages, fashion designers. I'm just seeing all the different aesthetics and being excited about it all, you know. And so what you're seeing is that there's almost fair game. It's almost starting to begin where you can't monopolize this game, where you're seeing people pop up here and there who have interesting stories to tell, and it's fascinating and it's endearing and you want to know more. And so something like fast fashion is, you know, it's your normal piece of clothing where there's not a story and it doesn't necessarily intrigue you anyway with you.
And for me, it's also what the pandemic did. As much as it slowed us down, it's also sifted around. So right now, within the creative industries, you can see fake, you're going to see real. Yeah. And that's what the pandemic did. It's what it made people to reimagine themselves, to reinvent their aesthetics, to reinvent their DNA brands, their DNA within their brands. And for me, that's when you're going to see the best of the best. Yeah. And you're going to see fast, slowly, but fastly.
Sure, as fast as it came in, right? And I'm glad to touch on social media and the impact of social media, the positive of social media during this pandemic. But Sasha, on the other hand, the negative of social media has been a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear about tomorrow, a lot of mental illnesses, a lot of depression, people constantly comparing themselves when we talk about the haves and the have-nots. And I have to say that fashion and beauty probably played a role, because I mean, when you see, Instagram is a visual element. So when you see a queue at Louis and you are trying to survive, you know, from hand to mouth, then you do the comparison. The importance of talking about mental health in this conversation and not allowing some of the messaging imposed on us, especially as women, to sort of deter us from our mental health. I mean, how would you suggest that we tackle the issue of mental health?
You know, the issue of mental health is something that's very prevalent in our country, but it's the unspoken story. It's the one we never speak about, the one we're uncomfortable to speak about, because there's a lot of trauma that we have survived, you know, as South Africans. I mean, COVID itself was traumatic. There's a lot of PTSD that everyone's still going through. I mean, just when we thought that this year was going to be so amazing. We had to, you know, let go of what we thought it would be in reach of something that we don't even know what we're reaching for. Because I'd like to think that on the 1st of January 2021 it would change, but that just isn't the case. And I think it's so important to understand that, especially on social media, we choose what we put on social media. No one's going to put there that they, you know, having a breakdown. No one's going to put there that they're struggling with their weight. No one's going to put there that, you know, well, I haven't worn my jeans, you know, for the past 5 months because I've been wearing track pants on Zoom, and now that is actually a problem because they actually don't fit anymore. So no one's going to put that out there. So it's very important for us to understand, you know, even from just the normal everyday South African looking into the life of a Miss South Africa, you only see one side of it. Not everyone puts, you know, we don't put everything on social media. So it's important for them to understand that, you know, you are human. And I think a lot of people didn't leave me, you know, to be a human, you know, during lockdown, because I mean, like everyone, I struggled with my weight. Like everyone, it was that weight, that lockdown weight that we all gained. So I think everyone is allowed to be human and go through a pandemic. I think we need to be very with ourselves during this time.
Absolutely. And again, Zozi, when we talk about, you know, fashion, you can't separate beauty from it. And beauty comes in different elements, whether it's, you know, makeup, whether it's hair care, whether it's, you know, taking care of self mentally. It comes in different ways, especially for women, because we're so finicky about, you know, how we look, because we want to put our best foot forward when we represent ourselves, you know, in public and to our loved ones. But my question to you is, how has your beauty afforded you your opportunities, and how do you advise other women to allow fashion and beauty to also afford them opportunities, or even to take opportunities in this particular industry?
Thanks, Tumelo. I think are you talking about what we call pretty privilege, which is, sorry?
We will actually listen to you right now, Zozi.
Yes. I think just generally it's so important to take every opportunity that we have, you know, as a people. And so it's so important to use fashion and to use beauty, you know, to step into the platform and be the people that we really want to be. And I really love that you asked, you know, this question, because when I won Miss South Africa, which is a beauty platform, won Miss Universe again, which is a beauty platform, the first thing that I tell people is I looked at this platform as a leadership platform for a woman. You know, there's not many opportunities in the world that are given to women to lead, if we're being honest. And so it's so important for us to identify those spaces where we can insert ourselves, you know, take up as much space as possible and use it to navigate ourselves into where we want to be, but also to contribute, you know, to our societies and to the world. And so I encourage everyone, to answer your question, to really take up every opportunity, you know, that they have. And it's just so sad, especially when you look at South Africa. And I think within the pandemic, we've seen the poverty line very clearly. And so it might be so easy for me to speak and say people must take opportunities, but there's certain people in corners of Africa and South Africa who do not have these opportunities because they are not being, you know, afforded to them. But I'm hoping that we can get to a place in South Africa, in Africa and the world where, you know, everybody gets an equal opportunity to be able to grab this fashion, this beauty platforms, and really whatever platform it is that they want their voices to shine in. And so, yeah, to answer your question, definitely it's very important to step into our dreams and these platforms and shoot off as far as we can.
And the reason I asked this question, Zozi, is because Felipe, in one of, you know, your answers, he said every freckle on my face tells a story of diversity in this country. So I see beauty as an opportunity to educate. On this very platform where we're live streaming on YouTube, there's so many different, you know, beauty influencers and YouTubers that educate either about being dark skin toned and owning it and educating about dark skin and how not to segregate and stigmatize based on the tone of my skin. I see women with different, you know, interests in hair, whereby they're saying, hey, hair is beautiful, whether it's long, curly, whether it's coarse. It's that opportunity in that element of beauty and educating the world about who we are, our different, shades of beauty. So I think that's beautifully seen that there are opportunities in beauty. You need to identify your beauty and educate the world about your kind of beauty. So that's what we're going to leave it for now. But you want to, Susie?
Yes, I just wanted to add on, what you just said about taking these opportunities, because people have this perception of looking at beauty and women in just one thing. And I always say women are so multifaceted. We're not just one thing. And so you cannot just, box women and fashion in that way. And so we look at incredible people like, Lizzo, who is she's an artist who goes out there and speaks about body positivity, and she just like throws herself and her attitude towards people. And so we learn so much from her. People like Sasha Lee, who took that chance, to go onto the platform knowing that she would get that criticism. But I think deep down inside, Sasha, you knew that it was so important for you to be there, because there's so many women who look like you, who've been scared, to jump in and take that opportunity to be that. And so I absolutely agree. We absolutely have to do it. It's very scary. It's not an easy thing. I would know. I've been through a whole year of sometimes hell from people who still aren't accepting of the way that I look, and people who ask me how dare, I become Miss Universe. And for me, I want to say it is the audacity. That's all you need. You need the audacity to step out there and be like, this is me. This is who I am. I am absolutely necessary for this space. You are necessary, Sasha. Nandi, you are absolutely necessary for African women. And I am necessary as well to be in these positions that we are in. Because again, it goes back to being, in order for us to be it, we have to absolutely see it.
Do something about it if we don't see it. And as you talk, Zozi, you also remind me of different women, let's say perhaps for example in the makeup industry, who would actually even note where there isn't a particular shade for women, and they would challenge the corporates, they would challenge the conglomerates and say, why isn't there this shade? Those voices are absolutely important to say we cannot always try and be who we are not. We can't always have just fairer foundation or a fairer kind of color. We need more inclusivity. And those voices are absolutely important in making sure that there are opportunities for women. But I would leave it at that. We'll get into more of this conversation.
I think you forgot one element about inclusivity and diversity. It's about disability as well. When it comes to that, I think we didn't touch on that, which is very, very important.
Yeah.
How the fashion and beauty industry treats people with disabilities. I think that's a very, very important issue. I really think that from designers to makeup artists to architects, how they design buildings, how do you ever think about people with disabilities? That for me, that is not inclusive. Do designers think about people who are short? That for me is one aspect. For me, what we spoke about is just the cherry on top. What about the real core of what other people are going through in terms of the diversity you're talking about? What about the LGBTQI people? What about the disability? We didn't touch on those subjects. We just touch on the frivolous. We are actually perpetuating what is already been. I think there's, for me, we really need to revisit this topic and really delve deep.
I love what you said. So there's so much unlearning we need to do. I saw Victoria Beckham using a lady who's shorter than your average height. And how that was like a huge thing for her collection. I think it was last year. But there's so much unlearning we need to do, because fashion at the end of the day is for me, you, and everyone in the world. And you can see how we've just been conditioned to think.
And fashion is not necessarily clothes. Fashion is what we eat. Fashion is what we is the architect. Absolutely. So for me, all those for me, inclusivity is like when an architect designs a building, do they think about the people with disabilities? For me, that is part of fashion. Absolutely. For me, fashion is not necessarily clothes only. So let's go back and unlearn what fashion and beauty is all about. And for me, this has been spoken about. We have been dominant again. Let's tackle the issue.
Absolutely. And even Tandoho comes to mind when we talk about inclusivity, because it's been quite a huge example in South Africa of a woman who has taken the stage. We've never seen anyone like that.
And also, let's not glorify that whole fashion. That one season it's people with freckles who are fashionable. The next season it's plus size people. The next season is people in wheelchairs. Let's consistently be inclusive of everybody.
Right.
So for me, being freckled does not make me unique. For me, Thando Hopper being with albinism does not make any she's still human. It's just pigmentation.
Absolutely.
Someone with disabilities does not mean a mental state is not working. So let's unlearn and reinvent our methodologies in addressing diversity and inclusivity. We just touched on the beauty aspect, and we are still perpetuating what's going on.
And you know, it's the little things, like from the standpoint of being, you know, a model on set. Sometimes the brief that they get for, you know, the colored woman or the woman that's supposed to be a colored girl, the cappuccino girl is often one with curlier hair. What happened to the cappuccino girl who doesn't have the curly hair? Why is it that my hair texture needs to change in order for it to seem natural to that particular group? Because that's often something that I deal with on set.
Sure. Let's get some of those comments that I've been asking about, you know, coming from everyone watching. I'm sure you cannot wait to share with us what exactly has been on your mind when it comes to this particular topic around diversity, when we speak about inclusivity, when we talk about the important issues really around this issue. What is on your mind? I'm just awaiting to receive some of your questions, and I'll be sure to read them. The screen's a bit far from me, so I cannot see it all. I'll try and put my glasses. I can't see. Please appreciate a copy of the questions. Otherwise, I'll have to stand up and read from afar, just so that I can see what are some of your questions which are coming up. All right, let me check my phone if make use of technology actually and see if there isn't any communique with regards to any questions that we're getting there. All right, I see a couple of questions here coming. Let me take this one coming here from Zama Tusi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. The question is, being true to who you are is foundation of a creative and imaginative life. I think that's actually a question, a comment rather, not a question, right? Celia also has said, owning who we are, our difference, is our strength. As Tembi so says, or rather, you know, we've started an audio conversation. This is quite important. I'm seeing Barbara here saying, how do we, the public, participate in the ownership of the full value chain in the fashion economy and not just be the consumers? Perhaps we can start tackling this one, Felipe, if you may, first, please.
I strongly believe I'm one to start a very secular fashion system. I believe that I have to support my own in order for my own to grow. And for me, it's the same platform. I'm going to go back to the Beyonce mode. I've got this whole different methodology about it. I feel, yes, she did put a visual entertainment. For me, if I was Beyonce and Jay-Z with all the money that I had, like Dr. Precious and the Motsepe Foundation are doing, I would have done on the premiere of that video, I would have a shop in Fifth Avenue, a pop-up store with all those designers from Africa, so that I'm not only speaking the language, I am making people buy the language. I am supporting the people and say, at least when that coming. For me, that whole video was just a visual orgasm, and after that, what happened? For me, that is my opinion. For me, we cannot start something if you cannot be feeding the people at the bottom.
Absolutely.
I cannot use your talent. And for me, beyond Nandi and them, there were artists and designers who contributed to that. And some of their clothes, maybe some of them were not returned.
Right.
But for me, at least if someone bought one car from America, that store would have had a whole block if they had that pocket.
Before you answer, Nandi, I want to ask you, Felipe, now that you're touching on that, there were some critics who criticized the film in saying that Beyonce is exploiting African culture. Do you feel the same?
I don't feel the same. I just wish we could have funded
on expansion.
Further. For me, in creating economy, secular economy, I do appreciate your talent, but then can I buy your whole collection, put it in my store only for 2 weeks, and for you to feed your seamstress, the lady who's got all your patterns, and wear the cotton on. For me, it's about creating that circular system.
Nandi?
By the way, we have conversations like this all the time.
Yeah.
This is
normal.
This is normal. Okay. But I think what's really great is, first of all, I agree with what you're saying, but I think because a lot of people don't know, and it's so hard when you're a big superstar because you don't think about everything. But behind the scenes, there was a lot. I know even from a website perspective, designers were actually very honored because she did put all the designers' names.
I'm gonna cut you.
No,
That directory for me, it is like yellow pages that doesn't exist anymore.
No, but I understand what I'm trying to say is that, and again, we have this conversation all the time, so this is getting good, everyone watching. This is getting really good. So, and that's what I'm saying, the follow-through, I absolutely agree with it. To be honest, she's a singer at the end of the day, she's not a fashion designer. But it's important to have a team, and that's what I was about to say. Absolutely, and that's where this conversation is important, where then you have people like that to suggest stuff. Obviously, I know at the time they were thinking this would be enough, this was sufficient. What you are saying is that this is where this narrative talk needs to follow the narrative. How do we navigate to ensure that they post that? And that's what everyone's been talking about, the business of fashion, because of course you show your clothes, and then what happens after that? So you're absolutely right.
And in creating the secular fashion thing, going back there, if she had done that, then it is black owned. And it's supporting black people. Then it starts taking off from Bloomingdale's. From Bloomingdale's, it goes further and further. That's when we as black people start owning. Right now, this whole culture system within the whole world, 15% has to be given to black designers. That is absolute BS. For me, we are the 90% of consumers of the clothing and textile industry. Beyond the fact that we are responsible for planting and growing that cotton.
And it's due. This is why it's something as well, because I've been to many of these seminars, especially fashion seminars, and it's talk, but then let's do that. Let's be that change. You get what I'm saying? Let's ensure that we are creating that change.
Right. I have told it then, but due to time, I have told it, but I'm going to actually, because you mentioned a very good point here around how exactly we do that. But Zozi, I want to come to you because there's actually a comment here what you touched on. Zbos says, I like that Zozi not disregarding pretty privilege or denying its existence. And I want you to elaborate perhaps even on that again, Zozi, because there was also, a conversation even around colorism within the industry as far as opportunities are concerned.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the first step towards having that conversation is to actually accept that there is such a thing, as colorism, as pretty privilege. And I think the most important thing that people need to understand is when we speak about things such as colorism is not to take offense and to be defensive and to say, but I got this job on merit. I'm sure you did, but I think we need to understand better that the darker skin hasn't always, been supported or put forward. And I'm going to make an example of, I was just reading this article when they were casting for a movie. I forgot this particular movie. And they provided us with casting, how they would cast for the movie. And there was a type A girl who was said to be light-skinned, if she was black, at least curly hair, like, Sasha said, there's that beautiful hair that they love now, that's like an in thing, or a weave girl. And then type B girl was, maybe a black girl with a weave, and a type C girl, which was labeled as the ghetto girl on the script, would have to be dark skin, natural hair, and all of that stuff. And so I think it's important for us to know that there is, in fact, things like that exist in society, and for us to be able to be accepting and to say, look, there is such a thing as colorism. If you are furthest away from being dark skin, you are most beautiful. And so it's such an important conversation to have, and specifically not only from people who are dark skinned, but the people who are getting these jobs because of the color of their skin. They need to be accepting and to own it and to say, look, there is such a thing as colorism, and in order for us to move away from that, we need to talk about it. We need to be aware of it. And so there is such a thing as pretty privilege and colorism.
Right.
In the industry.
I want to come to you, Sasha, and read this comment first. This comment says, I want as an African to be able to dress like an African without it being Heritage Day. How do I do that?
I think everyone's we've had this idea of modern, and modern has been Eurocentrism, and that's where the mistake is. There is the possibility for Africa and all that it is to be modern too. And I think it's important for us to embrace our heritage and all that it is, because it's an extension of who we are. And I think, you know, they would, as we, you know, we make the shift to this global village, it would somewhat to a certain degree be watered down. Not because we want it to be that way, but because, you know, all cultures did not historically enjoy parity of esteem. That's just how it was. We've seen that through colonialism. We've seen that through, you know, up until now with, you know, Black Lives Matter. We've seen that certain individuals have been marginalized for the longest time. And it's evident in things, extensions of who we are, just like fashion. So it's important for us to understand that African, like, clothing can also be modern. I think that if that shift happens, you know, it's possible.
It's possible. I want to ask this question to both you, Nandi and Felipe, but Nandi will go first. She will answer first and she will finish her sentence. Felipe, this is not you and Nandi's fiction. We have these conversations.
We're so passionate.
So passionate. Like, no, I'll get in there, my friend. All right. So, Nandi, there's a question here coming from Kansani who says, I'd like to hear more about what is being done to transform the production space, especially in runway shows and production and creative direction. What has been done with regards to transformation?
Sure. And so I had a show, a lot of people don't know, I was the executive producer for a show called Made in Africa. And that was one of the key points we kept tackling on. Philippe would know this very well. You know how many factories have closed. It's terrible. People have been jobless. And the biggest issue is getting funding from government, but it's beyond funding. It's actually just the culture changing, the shift. Now, I was just talking about during now with Felipe and I were going at it and like, we need to do, we have so many of these panels, and, you know, these panelists. And, but while saying that, someone like Dr. Precious Motsepe is a doer. She is so critical for this industry because so many of us can talk and we keep talking, but you need someone who comes and says, okay, I'm going to be a solution to this problem. Look at what she's done. I presented in 2016 Color. She made that happen. That was, you know, me as an aspiring fashion designer who wanted to understand the world more, had a platform to do such. So even in terms of production, you need that kind of support. You need support from our government. And it's just to see, I mean, you're seeing so many incredible people, Rich, Nisi, Tebes, I mean, Cindy, so the list goes on and on and on. But from a global perspective, on loved and appreciated and we're winning incredible awards, but you're not seeing the backup from our own. And that's where
especially from government.
Absolutely.
And for me, that's the most important platform with AFI at this point in time is that you can literally buy clothes from the runway into the AFI store. Online or physical. And for me, that is an initiative that is saying, let us start creating that economy that I spoke about earlier. Because some of the designers do need that retail space. They cannot afford that retail space. But then if there is a kind of platform where from showcasing, you go directly into a space where you can be able to make money from these kudos.
That's so important because it's speaking about doing, and you're basically saying it should not just be about PR, marketing, talk shop. It should be about.
It's physical.
It should be physical.
It should be physical. That's going back to Beyonce. It should be physical.
It
should be something that people can go in there and say, I saw Beyonce wearing that top, and here's the store. Can I buy that? Even if that one is it's a couture one, can I buy a replica within the same designer range for 500 rands? For me, that is about doing an initiative.
I'm going to ask this last question, and Felipe, perhaps you can also take this one. It's coming from BAAB Media Group, and they've asked, on that point, bringing it to Africa, how does tribalism affect fashion trends?
Like I said again, for me, it's not about tribalism. Tribalism right now, everyone wants to know each other. So people are going back into reinventing and telling their stories. So every tribe has got their own sense of identity. I want to know more about the Suti people. So I will buy the Suti hat because someone has explained it all. So for me, there isn't. The problem is not tribalism; it is appropriation.
So the wording.
The wording is completely different. For me, we are, especially now with everything going slow and artisanal. Everyone is talking about themselves and their cultures and their roots.
We're going to take last remarks because, I mean, at this point, we're a bit over with a couple of minutes, and we apologize for that because we had a bit of technical glitches in the beginning, hence the time. But at this point, as we've received your questions and your comments, I'm seeing definitely, a hunger for change. from our viewers, from those participating in this conversation. Hunger for change and transformation when it comes to those who are influential, when it comes to decision making, the red tape that we see around this particular industry, but those who want to participate in this industry, but also consumers, those who want to buy and want to access, and have no barriers to access. That's what I'm getting from this. But Zozi, if I could just come to you for your last remarks based on this conversation that we've had. Felipe, of course, also mentioned that there's so many layers to it, and it seems we've just touched on the surface. There's so much when you look at architecture, as he said, around people living with disabilities, around young and old, different races. As you close off this conversation, where do you foresee the future of African fashion moving towards?
I think Nandi mentioned earlier on that Africans have always had it. We are the birthplace of almost everything. You look at fashion, everything is influenced by, Africa. And so I think now it's time that we go back to that and say, this is where everything started and this is where the evolution is going. So I've had such an incredible time with this topic, being able to speak about it with the panel and seeing things that can be done. And, Felipe said so many important things of we can all talk as much as we can. We can all show as many visuals as we can. But if we're not doing anything about it, what are Black creatives getting from it? They need to get something out of their work. And so it's through conversations like this, but then taking it a step further and saying, look, here's an African designer, here's their fashion. It looks absolutely incredible. Let's marvel over it, but also let's put it in stores. I want to see something when I walk down the streets of New York. I want to see it at Bloomingdale's, like he said. And so I think that's the direction that we need to be headed towards. We've discovered that Africa is the birthplace of fashion. We've talked about it now. Let's see what happens next in the future. And so I think that's where we need to be right now.
As you close, of course, this conversation, particularly when it comes to diversity and inclusivity, as a South African woman, how can I play my part wherever I am in my corner? Because I think at times when we think of influence, we think, oh, I need to be a certain person of standing in society, but I could be a community member. I could be influential in my family, amongst my siblings and my friends, and at school. From where I am in my corner in South Africa, in the continent, how can I ensure that I play my role when it comes to diversity and inclusivity?
You know what is so important, and we've seen it in COVID, because jobs like Miss South Africa is very much hands on the ground. It's unfortunate because I haven't been able to do my job as best as I could. We only had Zoom like everyone else. But the great part about COVID was that as I took a step back, South Africa took this great leap forward, and everybody was doing what a Miss South Africa does, which was make a difference in their community. So I think for women and their role in this place is very much to command their space, to show up, and adding on to what Zozi said, understand that wearing African attire or celebrating your culture shouldn't be considered unprofessional. Having a different hair type shouldn't be considered unprofessional, which it has been for the longest time, and that's the elephants in the room that we should be discussing, because the way we were historically was not celebrated even up until now. And those things we need to start celebrating. We need to understand that our Afro is professional, because it's who we are.
Absolutely.
We need to go to work dressed like this and understand that it is corporate.
Yeah, and I'm so proud. Actually, I'm happy you say that, because it reminds me of how proud I am of even seeing how high scholars, young girls in high school, are actually defying the norm. And they're saying, I will go to school with my Afro, and I will challenge some of the policies in school that try to even tell me that I'm not enough based on my hair. For you, Nandi, as a business owner, a fashion designer, I see you as, one of the new ages coming up and, owning your story when it comes to how you view Africa, who you are, what your story is. How do you think young African fashion designers can maneuver their way into this industry when it comes to funding, as we've spoken, when it comes to support from government, because we still need those stakeholders to hold our hand so that we can be able to maximize our potential?
And that's a great question. Thank you so much. First of all, we have to be aware that we are incredible, but there'll definitely be hurdles. And I want to give a realistic answer, is that the support, unfortunately, is not where it needs to be with the youth as a whole, and you know that in fashion. But I've seen people being very creative, especially when I say social media, as hard as it can be at times. But I've seen people taking on the fact that the world is constantly sharing and being able to see different aesthetics and what people have to offer.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to say is to be as creative as possible. I remember, you see people like Richard Nisi, for example, who was once a line of students and now is this incredible name, and that's because, if anything, he's always been innovative in the way that he taps into different markets. And of course, it's trial and error. And it's a beautiful story as well. Or, for example, entering LVMH prize, a contest that like Tebe did. And knowing that, okay, if I don't necessarily get as much support as I'd like maybe here, but maybe globally, so it's being as creative as you can be to tap into certain markets and get your work acknowledged. But there's also something I love, just to contribute to what you were saying, is who was she and what did she do? She was herself and she did it all. And that's what I've always just personally kept to myself, that being a media personality for so long, I've been rocking this natural hair for the longest time, when it wasn't popular. But you have to have the innate sense of self. I'm speaking to everyone watching here to understand that what you have going on, your DNA, who you are, is incredible and enough. And now just move and navigate and find opportunities and see ways that you can break the ceiling, because you are enough.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nandi, for that. But I don't even want to box you to a question. I want to even limit you to a question. What do you want to tell the people of the world?
I had a very interesting conversation with one of the designers from New York through the AFI platform. She's got a brand called Kahindu. And she was telling me an amazing story as we're engaging, how she entered Project Runway, the design run, Project Runway. And then a couple of times, when eventually she got it, and now she got eliminated around what was the fourth. But now she's based in America and New York. But now most of her work, she sources fabric from Nigeria, it's woven. She's originally Congolese. She's got Congolese women doing her beading. So she's spread all her economy throughout her own people within the continent. I think that's very, very important, how we use. For me, it is not only about the person sketching. It's about the lady who sewed it. It's about that lady who planted the cotton. So can we take it back and give credit to everybody along the village?
Absolutely.
And for me, my whole essence is wear local, look local.
Absolutely.
That's my hashtag.
That's the hashtag to use right now. And plant the hashtag in the comments, of course, if you're with Felipe. Felipe, thank you so much for joining us. Nandi, thank you for your contribution. Such an honor and privilege talking to you. And Zozi, thank you so much for making time. I know it's early where you are, but of course you woke up for us. Thank you so much for joining us, Zozi, for this conversation. And on the note, I want to also thank each and every one of you for joining this conversation from where you are on social media, on YouTube. The comments keep coming. I know that even from where you are in the comment section, dialogues are taking place, and it's one that you will continue to have in your spaces, professionally, in corporate, and move in this country forward, because at the end of all of this, we're talking about diversity, inclusivity, the importance of it, transformation. When we talk about who has a say on what you and I consume, what you and I regard as beautiful, ownership, but importantly, knowing our history and telling it correctly and narrating it for generations to come, that's also important. So thank you so much for joining us. So I want to send a special thank you as well to Africa Fashion International, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, for this platform for all of us young people to also engage on this, learn on this platform. Thank you so much to our team. I'm seeing the hard work behind the scenes, from the camera crew to all the plant staff, to everyone at Sound, making sure that we're on air. Thank you so much for making sure this is a success, but also to our partners, Constitution Hill, for allowing us to have this conversation you'll miss in such a history-rich venue, and also to the French Institute SA for partnering on this platform. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Tumelo Mothotoane. It was an honor talking to you, and hope we'll see each other again sometime. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tumelo. Can you hear me? Hi, Tumelo. Thank you very much. Let me thank you for being our absolutely amazing facilitator. You've really kept the conversation going. You have even stopped Felipe and Nandi from fighting. And I could just see the passion that was coming through. Zozi, Sasha Lee, you guys were awesome. What I take away from this discussion is, number one, I want to see that hashtag reclaim, tell our stories, self-love, you are enough. That is so important, that we stop looking for others to affirm us and we take ownership. So I love what you all guys said. We have reset, reimagine, reinvent, but you have added reclaim. And that's very, very important. I've also taken away from a very important discussion, the circular economy. That's very, very critical. I've been talking to our designers before we decided to host the virtual fashion week. And it really broke my heart to see how many of them have gone out of business, have had to lay off staff, and had to shut their stores. So please do support localization, do support our designers. What you see on the ramp over the next 2 days will be available at our boutique. And I urge you to please support the local designers. They do need your business. And that's how we can begin to talk about self-pride, by doing something about it. I think the third thing I also heard was in terms of the production and how we support local production. AFI, from 2007, we had set ourselves a goal of bringing transformation within the industry. People like Tebe Magugu that you spoke of have come off this platform. People like Tebe and Rich Mnisi have come off this platform. And I'm really proud to see how far they've gone. We have many other designers, but in terms of producers, we are also still struggling to help more producers to become successful. And we're doing a lot of work. We've been working with Dion Redman, who's also brought a lot of young producers to be part of our platform. You mentioned media and corporate. We need to challenge them. We need to make sure that we challenge them to ensure that there is inclusivity. You guys spoke so eloquently about privilege. And it's good for us to talk from where we are, but we need to make sure that there is true transformation happening, that when we see adverts and when we see the news, we see ourselves in our diverse background. Felipe mentioned also that we don't talk about just beauty. We should talk about people with disability as well. Very, very critical. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think this was an incredible way to start the discussions around diversity and inclusivity, and to begin to support our local fashion industry for the social and economic development of our country. So thank you very much. Ke a leboga, ngiyabonga. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
The women's jail at Constitution Hill dates back to 1910, when it was built in close proximity to the old fort at Number 4. The prison housed both black and white women convicted of common law and political crimes. Many black women were arrested for brewing beer illegally and for transgressing pass laws, which made them vulnerable to arrest and irrevocably divided families. Together with their mothers, many children also spent time in the women's jail. Prominent anti-apartheid activists Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, Fatima Meer, and Barbara Hogan were all incarcerated at the women's jail during their political careers. Together with the rest of the precinct, the women's jail closed in 1983.
Reset, reimagine, and reinvent. A contemporary African fashion film experience to inspire you. Entertainment by Casper Nyovest and the best of African fashion whilst exploring the beauty of our continent. Secure your front row free ticket at www.afi.events to enjoy the visual experience.